Hey everyone, this is Anna Gressel, and you're listening to the AI Drop, your briefing on how AI is reshaping the future of business law and industry. We bring you fresh drops each week so you never miss a beat. Welcome to the podcast. Hey everyone, I'm super excited today because I'm joined by Roozbeh Motagi, who is a leading researcher in robotics and embodied AI. He's been at a number of top research labs and companies focusing on these issues, and he's joining us in his personal capacity today, and we're going to nerd out a little bit on robotics and how robots learn and move in the real world and what that means for the future of the robotics field. So I am absolutely thrilled. I've been so excited to kick us off with our first robotics episode, and I can't imagine a better guest than Roozbeh for that conversation.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
So, Roozbeh, you've been in this field for a long time, and I was watching some of your old videos, looking at your research, and it was, I think, at least 2017 that I got back to. So it's been a minute. Tell me a little bit about how you got into this field and what drew you to it originally. What questions were you trying to solve?
So it dates back to my undergrad days. So the year we entered the school, there was a team at our school that participated in the RoboCup competition. So RoboCup competition was a competition for soccer playing robots, and I think it's still going on. But they have a different format. It's not just soccer playing robot. It has like other types of tasks as well. And this is about 25 years ago. And basically, the team from our school became world champion. And it was really a big deal for us. So the people on the team were our role models and we looked up to them. We wanted to be like them. And basically, long story short, the year after we formed the team and we participated in those competitions. And it was a very rewarding experience for us. And that's basically the start of my journey into the robotics domain.
If you think about like 25 years ago to maybe even 10 or 15 years ago, what were the major challenges that the robotics field were trying to solve for at that point in time?
So generally, one big problem that we are facing, not only in robotics and AI and in general, is basically generalization. Can we have models that can work in different environments? It's like if it works in my house, it should also work in your house. If it works in factory A, it should also work in factory B. Like, so can we have general purpose robots? I think that was a problem back then. It's still a problem, and everybody is focusing on that. Can we have something that can generalize well to different environments, to different objects, to interact with people, and so on and so forth? I think that was a key challenge since like decades ago.
And how were people trying to solve it at that time? What were the main research areas when you think about the first half of your career?
So the world back then was a bit different. So basically it was before the AI spring. So everything was kind of manual. Basically, there were no larger scale data sets. It was mostly researchers checking every details of the work to see what works, what doesn't work, and so on. So it was a very different world and people worked on like different types of problems. But after basically the revolution that we had in AI and over the past decade, things changed drastically. So it's basically now we are looking for larger scale data sets. Now we are looking for generalizable or general purpose robots. Before it was a kind of a special purpose robot. So we had the robots in car factories and they worked very well, but there was no AI in them. It was mostly pre-programmed. They were mostly like pre-programmed robots. Or we focused on like very specific problems. With self-driving cars, so we wanted to solve one task. But now we want robots that are capable of doing many different tasks. A robot that folds the laundry, it should also make coffee. It should also put garbage outside and so on and so forth. So these are like many different tasks that we expect a robot to do. We are going from special purpose robots to general purpose robots. And that's a very challenging problem because the AI is not really there yet. And then we need to do more research, do more developments to understand the challenges, to understand the failure modes so we can get there.
Yeah, it mirrors a lot of what we've seen even outside of the robotics space when we think about AI moving from big data models and you'd have this massive amount of data and yet it would be used for a binary prediction. Like, should we do this? Should we not do this? Like, yes or no, or like stack ranking things. And those are pretty specialist tasks in the AI space. Versus now, we think even about chatbots, they can do so many different things. In fact, when we apply them to new problems, they often come up with kind of weird and interesting and creative solutions. And so, in a way, we're learning what they can do from observing those models as they're becoming more sophisticated themselves. But robotics makes that even more complex. And I think for folks who are in the audience who don't live and breathe robotics, what makes the way that we're seeing chatbots work in this generalized way, what makes that really different than trying to solve that problem in the robotics physical world space?
There are a few challenges here. So one is basically the sensors. Like for example, in robotics, we have vision, we have touch, we have other modalities. I think that adds another level of complexity, like how to handle touch, how to feel force, and also for vision, so we can see many different scenes and or many different objects. Basically, how to handle that diversity is not really easy. Another challenge about robotics is data. So, for example, for training language models or chatbots, you can go on the internet, you can download the documents, and you can train your models with that data. But there's no such thing for robotics. You cannot go on the web and download like robot data. No such thing exists. And collecting data for robots in different environments is quite challenging. So I think that also another complexity that we need to deal with. Other than that, we are dealing with a continuous word. In chatbots deal with a discrete word in the sense that we have like 80,000 words in English. And basically, there's like a certain structure. So that's, for example, if you see the word am, and so there are a limited set of options that can appear after that. But for robotics, you can see basically anything. I mean, the possibilities are huge. Like, so it's really hard to figure out what the next action should be. These are some of the main challenges that we need to deal with for robotics and kind of makes it harder than other domains like chatbots and language models and so on.
One of the things we hear sometimes is, well, we're just going to create a lot of world models. We'll have agents simulate worlds. We'll have worlds upon worlds that are created by agents and world models working together. And then we'll just like unleash the robots in the simulated world. What is right about that? What's wrong about that? And where's the gap between this idea of the perfect simulation engine and actually making robots work in practice?
So there's always a gap between simulation and reality from different aspects. Like for example, first of all, the appearance that you see in the simulation, sometimes it's or most of the time it's cartoonish and it's really different from what you see in the real world. And if you train your models in the cartoonish environment, they don't really generalize to the real world. So that's one thing. Also in terms of physics, sometimes it's really hard to model physics, especially for example for touch or for contact forces and so on. So it's not really easy to model like those types of things. And simulation is not really the solution. And we need to go beyond simulation. Otherwise, we always have this simulation to reality gap. Regarding word models, there's a lot of work to be done in that domain. But for example, if a word model is trained on videos, it's not going to have any sense about like forces and it doesn't know anything about touch and so on because videos do not really have this type of information. So we cannot really learn those things from videos. They don't really give you the complete picture. It's just kind of touching the surface.
Yeah, it's like the difference between knowing how to talk about something and knowing how to do something. Like, that's how I think about it in my mind. You can watch a billion videos of someone riding a bike, but until you get on the bike and try to balance on the bike, you don't realize you have a sense of balance to reckon with. And gosh, I remember trying to like learn how to ride a bike when I was 6 and failing at that so many times before finally getting it right. And you get it right, and then it clicks in your head. But how do you get the robot to have that click moment is such like an interesting and curious question to me. And I'd love to talk about what is that training process look like? Do you like have to put the robot on the bike? What's the actual process to get them to do these like actually pretty complex tasks with physical items in the real world?
Yeah, that's quite complex. And also there are like some safety concerns. Like for example, if you put a robot on the bike and the robot falls, it might break and it might not function anymore and you lose, I don't know, 20K, 30K worth of robots. So we need other types of methods to train these models. And as you said, by just watching the video, you cannot really learn like how to bike. And by reading some text, you cannot really learn how to pour coffee. And you really need to interact with the world. You really need to sense the forces and basically react to those forces to learn these types of concepts.
So I remember a time where a lot of the work around AI generally was around reinforcement learning. And my understanding of reinforcement learning is you allow the model to actually try things in a virtual world or in a physical world. And by trying and often by failing, they learn to succeed. And so I remember these like stick figure images of people that were generated by AI, and the stick figure would try to walk and it would fall, and then eventually it'd pick itself back up and continue walking. Is that still a key principle of how robots are taught today? Or do you actually do more simulation in advance? Do you give them skills before they even start walking? Like, what's the balance and trade off between those things?
So there are various sources used by the research community these days. One source is simulation. So we can train the model, train the robot in simulation, and basically kind of like pre-train the robot in that environment. So it has some understanding of how the world works and so on. But it doesn't generalize to the real world. We need to augment that with other types of data sources. Some people use videos from internet, but as we talked, like that's also not complete. It has its own disadvantages. And some people teleoperate the robot. So there is a robot and there's human operator and teleoperates the robot to perform certain types of tasks. And that's also has its own advantages, and advantages that now you can feel forces, now you can interact with the physical world. But the disadvantage is that you cannot really scale it up to a large number. I mean, you cannot move the robot to many different locations and collect data. Scaling up the data using teleoperation is quite challenging. So there are very different techniques, and then also there are different learning algorithms. One type of algorithms we call imitation learning. So you basically imitate what you have seen. For example, you can imitate what you have seen in the videos and those things. Also, there's another class of methods, it's, as you mentioned, like it's basically reinforcement learning, like learning by trial and error. But that can take a long time to learn something meaningful because you try something, it fails, and you try something else and it might fail again, and then so on. Sometimes it might take like a million iterations to learn a complex task. So it's not super efficient, and people in the research community are working on different techniques on how to make learning faster, how to learn from fewer examples, and so on and so forth.
Roozbeh, let's pivot for a moment and talk about humanoid robotics. I think there's such a hot field right now, and we're seeing a lot of interest by investors in humanoid robotics startups. It is just a place where I think there's a lot of excitement and interest in how that field has come along, both in terms of how the robots are trained, but also like the physical capabilities and mechanics behind the robots that are driving some of the advancements. But when you think about what a real breakthrough moment would be in the humanoid robotics space, where we turn around and we say something new has happened, we're in a kind of a step change moment. What would that step change look like for you? What is the moment we're really waiting for?
Yeah, so we have made a lot of progress in this domain, like in terms of the hardware. If you compare the hardware today with what we had like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there's a huge gap. And you see very smooth movements and you see natural interactions and those types of things. So, hardware wise, we have made a lot of progress, but the AI is not there yet. Basically, the next step for humanoid robots is to make the AI work. And you see a lot of videos on social media and internet and news channels and so on. But I hate to say this, but most of them are fake. What do I mean by fake? I mean, some of them are scripted, like someone scripted something and the robot is doing the task. Some of them are heavily tuned for that specific setting. For example, you see a robot pouring coffee, but if you move the coffee machine 2 inches to the left and everything breaks and nothing works. So what's really going to impress me, or what I call breakthrough, is basically generalization of these AI models to different environments, to different tasks, to different objects. Sometimes, for example, people heavily tune the model for a specific object. Like, for example, the robot can work with this particular mug that they drink coffee from. But if I change the mug and I use a different mug, everything breaks and it cannot like handle this new object. So if we can handle like these types of generalization issues, I think that would be a like huge progress. And we as in the community are not really there yet. And these demos, most of them are kind of showing the future. It's not what's happening today.
One of the other things I think I'm really interested to watch for in the robotic space, in part because of what's happening with agents right now, is collaboration. We think about in the world of agents what human machine teaming looks like and understanding even the way agents are shaping our behavior as we're shaping theirs. This seems like it would have to be a key part of robotics as they are potentially integrated into our homes and workplaces. And I know you've thought about these issues. How do you think about developing, even before the technical capabilities, our understanding of what we need to measure or control for when humans are in the world that robots also inhabit?
Yeah, there are a lot of safety concerns, and we need to tackle those problems now. And we should not really wait until the AI gets there and we handle those. Similar paradigm in language models. I mean, people worked on safety, they make sure that it doesn't generate insulting comments, it doesn't hurt people's feelings, and then so on. So we have the same thing in robotics, and now you have physical damage. If there's not enough safety guards, the robot might damage the environment, might hurt people and then so on. So that's really important for applications that require interacting with people. Sometimes the robot work alone, like in factories and those types of things. So safety might not be the super big concern, but if we want to introduce these robots into society and ask them to work alongside people, I think safety becomes a number one concern.
There are different conversations that are happening about robots, and it's easy to kind of abstract out of this, and then you remember like, "Oh, that robot's big, and it weighs a lot, and it could topple over onto someone too." So, some of it is making sure robots behave safely, and then some of it is just the basic safety of putting a big thing into the world and having it interact with kids. I know a lot of our listeners too are trying to figure out where to get information on robotics and what they should even be following. Like, if you were someone who didn't live and breathe the robotics world, what would you be watching to see where these breakthroughs are happening? And are there benchmarks that people should be following or capabilities that they should be looking for? I think you've already mentioned zero shot or few shot learning, this ability to generalize from what a robot knows. But what else would you be tracking as the robotics space evolves?
Unfortunately, there's no single source that we can say, okay, so track the progress here. And there's no benchmark in robotics. Like for example, in other domains like chatbots and language models and GPT, and there are benchmarks, and people can see, okay, this model is better than that model, or this model like performs math reasoning like this well, and so on. There's no such thing for robotics in general because it's hard to have a common benchmark that everybody can run on. That makes even our life challenging because we don't know if I have this model, does it really work better than somebody else's model or not? So we don't know that because there's no benchmark for comparison. I would suggest maybe just check like what happens in reality. For example, for self-driving cars, people work on them for basically 20 plus years. And now we see self-driving cars on the streets and moving around and giving ride to people and so on. So that's an indicator that things have started working. I mean, by no means we have solved the problem of self-driving cars yet. So there's still a lot of room for improvement, but at least we see something that works in the physical world.
One of the other things that I'm really interested in is this question of how much do these separate advances in different spaces just lead themselves to these compound advances as we put together different pieces of the technologies? And so, one of the things we see, for example, a lot of discussion around in the generative design space is exactly the point that you raised earlier in our conversation. Like, can we model physics into AI systems so that they actually represent physical dynamics of the world? They understand how certain materials interact with other materials. That's obviously a huge piece of biological AI, what's happening in the kind of life sciences AI space. So each of these fields feels like they're circling in on the question of how to make AI less of a representation and more of a real world system with fidelity to kind of the dynamics that we all have to live with, and we all have to deal with gravity, we all have to deal with like our own biology. Do you foresee a world in which these pieces start to advance us potentially even exponentially because we can have them interrelate to each other? Are these fundamentally separate conversations that are happening in different fields and moving kind of in parallel but not talking to each other?
So the underlying concepts for different AI models is more or less the same. Like so for example, the models that we use in robotics is they're very similar to the models used for chatbots. I mean, the underlying concepts are they share a lot of similarities and we need to adapt them to a particular domain. Like so there are like some challenges that specific to robotics that don't exist in language models and we need to adapt them to our particular problem. So that's that. And because of that, because the models are very similar to each other, I can see connection of these models. Like for example, just to give you an example, in language models, like the same language model can give you information about law and also it can give you information about like psychology. Basically, you can have models that can handle many different domains. So that's in the language domain, but now you can consider different applications. Okay, so design, like simulation, robotics, and chatbots, and so on. We can also combine the different areas. And that's actually what agents do these days. Like, for example, an agent can handle a calendar, it can also handle your Google Doc, it can also handle something else. It means basically these are tools that are available to the agent, and the agent uses these tools to solve like different problems. So we have started to see that, but it's still, I mean, there is room for improvement.
It's so cool. I would love to, like, have you back on to continue this conversation because it just feels like in 2 months or 6 months, we're gonna even be in a different place. Everything's moving so quickly. Thank you so much for generously spending your time with us today, Roozbeh. It was fantastic to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure.
That's today's drop. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more of the AI Drop, hit subscribe and join us each week for fresh insights on what's shaping the future of AI. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and it does not constitute legal advice or establish an attorney-client relationship. It may be considered attorney advertising, so prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. The views expressed here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of their firms, organizations, or clients. For more information, please visit freshfields.com.